Couple days ago, I was reflecting on some of the parts of the first season of Star Trek Picard, and it occurred to me that in some ways, the Soji character could be thought of as a culmination of Data's journey in an intriguing way, not because of their similarities, but precisely because of their overwhelming differences. This particularly occurred to me when I was thinking back to the scene near the end of Picard season 1, where Jurati just woke up from a coma. Everyone finds out she was under the influence of the Romulans. And Soji kind of confrontively tells her, they told you to kill me too, didn't they? In addition to killing Maddox. And Jurati hesitantly admits it's true, but she says she wouldn't be able to go through with it. And then Soji kind of counters back. She's like, "Well, I would never give you a chance." But just a scene later, when the rest of the crew is gathered in the cafeteria, Soji and Jurati, the door opens and Soji and Jurati slowly walk over to join them. And it's kind of like Soji's resentful toughness, this kind of bitter edge of combativeness that was there before. Now it's nowhere to be seen, as she gently supports Jurati's weight and helps her slowly walk across the room, which seems like such a Data thing to do. When someone just finished telling you they were gonna, make plans from your life, and then moments later, you get a chance to help hold them up in a moment of weakness. And it seems in a moment like that, we see just the edge of the idea that Soji isn't just another android, nor is she merely different from Data or merely similar to Data. She's a very particular kind of variation on the theme of some of the things that were most positive in Data, and perhaps more generally, which Data showed us about the bright parts of the human condition. But she's also a very particular variation, a change, because her personality and psychological presentation are nothing remotely like early Data, later Data, Lore, Lal, Soong, any of the gang there. But she retains a familiar tone because of the simple, innocent, altruistic kindness and gentleness that is actually possibly the single most identifiable personality trait of Data, in contrast to other Soong androids and in contrast to most androids in general. And this got me thinking about Data's story starting in, around season 4 of TNG, surrounding the new improved emotion chip that Soong made for him. And I thought to myself, I wonder if what makes her different and the same is that she's kind of like this particular special kind of emotion chip that no Soong android has ever yet had in Star Trek. She's emotional, but it's not a loophole or a weakness or a risk. And I wonder if this tells us something about the nature of emotions and the variety of ways that emotions can coexist with us humans, and also the variety of ways that we humans feel about our emotions, and why we sometimes resent our emotions or venerate our emotions. And in different generations in real life, in different generations, it's been more popular to resent emotions or more popular to venerate emotions for a variety of reasons and in a variety of ways. So let's take some time and think about Star Trek androids, tying that in with meta emotions, psychology, and the people you'll meet in real life. But before that, let's get the obvious out of the way and remember that Data probably has always had some kind of emotions ever since the beginning, because he's not like Spock, who tries to deny his emotions as part of his Vulcan pride, nor is he like T'Pol, who's always violently trying to suppress her neurotic emotions to no avail. Data's actually just disconnected from emotions and can't comprehend a lot of emotions, such as when he breaks up with his girlfriend in the season 4 episode In Theory, and then he goes to sit in his chair and basically resume life as normal. He's not pretending or trying to keep calm. He just literally finished one intriguing project that failed and moves on to another intriguing thing to explore, But that doesn't mean he doesn't have any emotions. Data does, after all, long to be human, if you remember. And longing, what would that be? And then whenever he finds a Soong-type android somewhere, or let's say he has a chance to meet Soong himself, he's got this quiet fascination, like an eager, quiet little child who can't get his mind off something. Now, certainly it's true, if you remember when the topic of friendship came up that one time, and Data basically said that his circuits just get used to having other people around, and that's what it means to have a friend, but it's also true that Data is always doing certain things to endear us to him, such as trusting others even when it might hurt him, or protecting vulnerable people at risk to himself. And he always does so with kind of this naive innocence, but also with this eager curiosity about life, with this protective impulse toward those around him, and with kind of a dedication and perseverance in terms of living out his morals. the morals of his programming, of course. And also with this kind of perpetual inner drive that seems to reflect emotions like fascination, curiosity, desire, and longing to grow and change, and a careful sensitivity toward others, even though one would expect his EQ to be zero. I mean, it's not zero. It's low, but it's not zero. Hence why he tends to stir up such overwhelmingly strong feelings in other characters as well as in the viewer, because his EQ isn't zero. In contrast to the Doctor on Voyager, who knows all about emotions, he could list them all and tell you about everything you want to know about them, but he, in his behavior, tends to more often to stir up feelings of resentment and anger. So but Data doesn't do that, and so his EQ is certainly low, but it's certainly not zero. So at certain key points in Data's life, even before his emotion chip, we realize that he doesn't really have no emotions. He just doesn't have certain key emotions that get the most attention, and he can't comprehend those kinds of emotions in other people. But he does have his own emotions, his own quiet, childlike, passionate emotions, such as curiosity, confusion, desire, etc. These emotions that drive him to action and make us feel deeply when we see these emotional tendencies emerge unexpected, and also down the road, it leads to us feeling really angry when Lore takes advantage of him, or when some random tragedy happens and Data gets hurt. He always tells us he doesn't have any emotions, but we kind of feel something else. And we suspect, or at least I suspect, that it might be more accurate for him to say, in those situations when he denies having emotions and someone says something about what he must feel, and he or what his actions reflect in terms of emotion, and he says back he doesn't have any emotions. Well, some of us kind of suspect maybe it'd be more accurate for Data to say, wow, thanks for the compliment. I feel good when you tell me talk about my emotions, because I always feel a little sad and empty inside that I don't have any emotions. And I so wish what you said is true. Now, of course, Data doesn't say that because he doesn't think that way, and he doesn't have any feelings to identify. But sometimes the way he does talk almost makes us feel like that's kind of what he's saying. So anyway, all that to say, doesn't seem like Data really doesn't have any emotions, just not certain ones. And very importantly, he also completely lacks understanding of the emotions that he does have, which is something that a lot of humans can relate to. And also very importantly, that Data lacks important aspects of being able to understand other people's emotions, which is why when he finally got that emotion chip, when he first heard about the emotion chip, that was kind of the biggest thing in his life. But getting his emotion chip didn't turn him into Soji. Now, it's quite fortunate it didn't turn him into Lore. That would have been awful. But it just made him laugh all the time and cower in fear and get mad at people and get lethargic at the wrong times and and end up asking Picard to relieve him from duty because he feels so guilty and ashamed about how his emotions make him a failure. Of course, this was partly for comic relief in some of those moments, but also, I think, partly because this is what unemotional people are often afraid of. This is why we don't want to open up to emotions, because we don't want to end up being that guy or that girl. In real life, this is something that really happens. That really unemotional guy who people always mistake for a Vulcan, that people could almost mistake for a Vulcan. And then suddenly, who knows why, but he can't stop laughing and he ends up embarrassing himself. Or suddenly he's overwhelmed by anxiety and he can't muster up the courage to leave the house. Or he randomly loses it and starts letting people have it. When you ask him why he's mad, he doesn't really know. But these don't usually happen for the reason they happened to Data. It happened to Data because he opened himself up to a new side of himself, in a sense. Really, he put the new side of himself in himself, or he let Geordi put it in for him. But in a sense, it's because it's like he opened himself up to a new side of himself. He began exploring and building capacities for emotion that used to be out of reach for him. And that's why suddenly he found himself completely out of control to the various emotions. But for humans, it tends to go completely the other way around. When we end up laughing uncontrollably or paralyzed by a fear we didn't know we had 5 days ago, usually it's not because of expanding your capacity for emotions, but instead, on the completely opposite side, It's a result of failing to expand your capacity, failing to give expression to the normal range of emotions, failing to explore what's actually going on inside of you, failing to make sufficient connections and conduits within yourself so that you can have a stronger connection with and a stronger influence on those secret hidden emotions, which are there. They're there inside you, whether or not you build the capacity to have um, this connection with them, this awareness, this openness of a relationship with them. I suspect that it's certainly a possibility, I think, that Data's loss of control when he gained his emotion chip may have been a bit of a nod to the natural fear that many unemotional people have of what will happen if they give a little space to emotions. You know, my emotions will just take over. I'll find myself in a spot where I'm just out of control, you know, that kind of thing. But it's actually the other way around. For humans, building a richer relationship with your emotions gives you the opportunity to build a skill set of self-awareness and self-regulation so that kind of things don't surprise you as much. So that when somebody asks you why you went and did this one irrational thing, instead of just looking at them with a straight face and saying, well, logic dictates that, you know, when logic doesn't actually dictate at all, you know, instead of that, you'd be able to say, well, hey, now that you ask it, I think I've been influenced by, you know, these little feelings that I kind of, you know, these feelings over here. Okay, so now that I realize that, how can I evaluate the situation and try to follow my values even a little better? You know, those two situations are quite different. So if Data's emotion chip represents the loss of emotional control, the person who has powerful emotions but can't control them, either because he's young and inexperienced with them, or because he's just been so busy repressing them all his life. If Data's emotion chip represents that, then maybe Lore represents the emotionally self-regulated person who has complete self-control in that sense, but no moral center. He knows how to keep his fear and anger and laughter in check when the stakes are high, but his ultimate goals in life are to please himself at the expense of others, which could be thought of as he's kind of doing everything to serve the paramount emotional impulse of self-service, self-gratification, wanting to get what you want, wanting to feel good in that sense. And in that sense, I think we can kind of recognize that actually emotions and values and moral beliefs, moral convictions, moral tendencies, all these things are very closely connected. So Lore, we could say Lore, through the corruption of his free will, he kind of represents another way that emotions can go wrong versus what happened with Data in Generations. For Lore, this is kind of when an emotional person or a person with emotional capacities and emotional awareness becomes self-serving and uses his emotional intelligence to manipulate other people and take advantage of their weaknesses for his own benefit to feed that paramount emotional impulse of self-gratification. When Soong made Data, he didn't want to make another Lore. So he made sure to keep Data's morality on the top of the pile in those subroutines. You know, an android shall not endanger the life of a human, that kind of thing. And that's the kind of thing that we see most clearly when we admire Data. We see his self-sacrificial kindness, his gentle sensitivity to little children and toward fellow crewmen, and even toward villains that are playing possum sometimes. Data has quick reflexes that instinctively risk his life to save others and support and help even those who are angry and bitter at him. Data has coded onto the very top of his neural stack. Data has the very best of what makes humans good. The new emotion chip that Soong made for Data in the TNG Season 4 episode Brothers, that new emotion chip was supposed to fill out the rest of his emotions so that he could have Lore's emotional intelligence along with Data's goodness. But because these feelings were just so strong and Data didn't have the learned experience to handle them, he just completely lost control when he got that chip installed in Generations. Kind of like a really emotional little kid who hasn't lived long enough to learn how to control his reactions. And also kind of like an emotionally inexpressive person who has been keeping his emotions so tightly under wraps and kind of repressed and pushed down so that they end up coming out in these uncontrolled bursts when it's least appropriate. Soji, on the other hand, is a little bit like the ultimate emotion chip. Instead of having the surging waves of emotion that leave you vulnerable and unpredictable, she instead has the calm arsenal of awareness that leaves you more capable, cognizant, and competent. In that episode of Picard that I mentioned earlier, in that same episode, Picard made this comparison between himself and Data. And it's a very apt comparison because the transition from Data, if we think of it as a transition from early Data to Soji, it's kind of a bit like the transition from early Picard in early TNG to where elderly Picard in Star Trek Picard. And I'm assuming that the reason for this is because most likely many of the people involved in coming up with Picard season 1 were people who place high value on these values of emotional intelligence, empathy, compassion, and interpersonal skills. Hence, the two central characters in the story, Picard and Soji slash Daj, are stereotypical idealized heroes in that sense, quote unquote heroes. Whereas in earlier generations of people creating Star Trek, in earlier generations, often it was the unemotional characters who were the heroes, both for the viewers and I assume from the people creating them. These were the heroes because they were unaffected and they were able to stand strong and impassive in the face of opposition or whenever any kind of thing happened. Hence, Spock from the original series, Picard from early Next Generation, and Data. Heroes and exemplars of strength without unnecessary emotion to make you weak. By the time we get to Star Trek Picard, however, the tides of culture have shifted and the value of visible emotions under control, emotional intelligence, empathy, and relational skills, these things have kind of come to the top in our culture in a lot of areas. It's not universal, certainly, but there are a lot of reasons that a lot of people are starting to prioritize these things and see their value again. And I think it's most likely the case that a lot of people who have lived through this cultural transition have ended up seeing and kind of cultivating personal changes in themselves, in which they've grown from being more like early TNG Picard toward being a little more like elderly Picard, personality-wise, and in terms of habits, proclivities, skills, etc. And so with all of that, then when the ultimate Soong emotion chip comes into the story, it's not just going to mean that Data can finally laugh when it's appropriate and Data can finally have a good romance instead of a cheesy one. Instead, it actually means that the new emotion chip is a highly self-aware, empathic, compassionate person who trusts others like Data did and has all of his, the goodness in him, but then is also able to grow as though by wrestling through the inner turmoil that comes from trying to reconcile your sense of the goodness the universe ought to be with the awareness of the universe as it actually is, with all its cruelty and vice, this kind of thing. And then for Soji, in the face of her awareness of evil, Soji becomes more and more like the ultimate version of what Data was intended to be, the ideal human, the best of what makes humans good, rather than becoming a more competent version of Lore, the emotionally intelligent person who uses the world with all his skill and subtlety, uses the world to work toward satisfying his most powerful inner urges at any cost. As humans, we can't add emotion chips if we're unemotional. We also can't turn off emotion chips when they get in the way, like Data did in First Contact. Nor are we born with emotional intelligence and relationship skills like Soji and Daj. Instead, more like Picard, we are born with certain capacities, and throughout our lives, we can use, listen to, cultivate, or suppress, resist, or explore these capacities. And we all have all kinds of different capacities. No two people are the same in terms of their natural balance between extroversion and introversion, or between, let's say, their possible range of height or weight, their vocal range, and how likely or unlikely they are to actually live through a normal lifespan instead of dying at 5, 10, 15, or dying at 80 instead of 90. But no matter what your unique capacities are, you've got capacities that will, to some degree, be influenced by your habits, beliefs, decisions, and social context, and things like that. And we have capacities to be selfless or selfish, to be sacrificial or greedy, to be more like Data or more like Lore. We also have capacities to be more emotionally aware or more emotionally unaware. We have capacities to be more unconcerned about the feelings and experiences of others, or to be more sensitive and compassionate than we would have been just by default. We can keep our imaginations rigid and self-oriented, or we can expand our universe by putting ourselves in other people's shoes. We can expand our universe by having the kinds of conversations that help us understand other people better. The more emotionally aware you become, the more skilled you are at, for example, experiencing, processing, and expressing your emotions in healthy ways, observing the emotions and experiences of others, valuing and appreciating other people's emotions and experiences in healthy ways. The more you develop in that direction, you're not going to have a chip in your head that you can just take out at will. But building these skills isn't going to leave you weaker and more vulnerable like data in generations. It'll leave you stronger and more aware, particularly if you're able to build your resiliency through facing difficult circumstances, and be able to, kind of like what Soji has to do, to be able to integrate your understanding of the goodness and cruelty of the world without losing your moral center and becoming lore. So in conclusion, I think Soji could be thought of as reflecting an implicit culmination of Data's journey, because she was this android built from the Soong model that was built to have a cognizant, self-integrated connection with her emotions and an awareness of and connection with the emotions of those around her, in contrast to Data in generations, who got his emotions, but they were a source of weakness, and they reflected a fragmented self that actually functioned better without them. And I also think that Soji reflects the changing values of the current generation, as the most important heroes of Star Trek Picard are deeply emotional, both in temperament as well as in skills and behaviors, reflecting an idealized hero category that values empathy, compassion, and emotional intelligence rather than impassivity, rigidity, and impersonal logic. In contrast to Kirk, who rigidly demanded Charlie X to do what he was told without any psychological, appeals. In contrast as well to Spock, who in a different episode told Kirk that showing too much transparency and weakness as a leader when he's going through a hard time is going to cost him his command. In contrast to those kinds of ideals, the most important heroes in Star Trek Picard default to building emotional connection, showing appropriate vulnerability, and tending to appeal to the individual psychology of the person they're trying to impact, that kind of thing. So that's it for this video. If you're interested in more content that talks about the overlap between sci-fi / fantasy, overlapping with psychology, philosophy, spirituality, stuff like that, if that kind of thing interests you, go ahead and hit subscribe. And whatever you do, don't go through with the colon R.